How did Howie Rose fall in love with the Mets?
We were moving in the summer of '62 from the Bronx to Bayside, Queens.
Okay.
Pretty close to where Shea Stadium was being built at that time. But when the Mets were formed, I thought, okay, I'm a new baseball fan, so they created a new team just for me. I thought it was all about me.
Put it in the book.
Yeah.
Can you give us a rundown of how that came to be?
We'd be playing ball in the schoolyard or even sitting in the upper deck at Shea. If a team I was on, doesn't matter, playing basketball or stickball or even roller hockey or even watching a Met game in the upper deck at Shea, if the Mets won or if my team won, myself or one of my friends might have said, all right, that's in the books or that one's in the books or just some variation of that. These guys over here, John and Vito, they're the brains of this outfit, and you can meet them at the Apple.
Hey, what's up? It's Vito Calisi, Jonathan Barron, and we are very excited because we are joined by the longtime voice of the Mets Hall of Famer, Howie Rose.
Why are you so excited about that?
Well, because you know, Howie,
It's a long time coming, Howie.
we've been listening to you most of our lives.
I know, that's scary. I get it. I don't doubt it, but it's scary to me.
We're not as old as we look. We're young. We're two young cats.
I was going to say we're older than you think.
Between the two of you, I might be older than you two combined.
When was your first Met game?
My first Met game was...
What year?
My mom took me 2004.
Okay.
How old were you?
In 2004, I must have been 11.
Okay, so that would mean you were born in 93?
92, December. So it's
December 92, okay.
My first game was August 26th, 1997, Mets-Giants.
And you were how old at the time?
I was about to turn 6. My dad had a philosophy that I am currently struggling with myself now that I'm a father, that it's pointless to take a kid before the age of 5 or 6.
Yeah, because you're doing that for yourself.
You're doing it for yourself. You're not burdening, but it's challenging to bring a young child to sit through 9 innings of a game.
Absolutely.
And then they're not going to appreciate it and really understand it. So he waited. I mean, it turned out, seemed like he made the right move.
Yeah.
I remember, I think a 15-6 final score. Didn't see a home run, though.
Okay.
I
That was
did.
a bummer.
I saw a Mike Piazza home run versus the Braves.
Well, that's a very long-winded way of answering my question.
When was your first game?
Very depressingly,
When was your first
I am older
game?
than both of you combined. My first game,
Yeah.
believe it or not, it was the first one I can remember because just as you suggest, I know that my dad took me to Yankee Stadium before I was old enough to appreciate it. My father was a crazy Yankee fan. So 1961 was the first year that I remember going to a game, the year before the Mets came into existence, of course. And the first game I remember going to was an old-timers day at Yankee Stadium. It rained enough so that they didn't play the old-timers game, but they introduced the players. And I was 7 years old, and I've been watching enough to know that Phil Rizzuto was a Yankee announcer. And then I see him running around in a uniform wearing number 10. I said to my dad, what's he doing in a Yankee uniform? And my father starts laughing and says, well, he was a terrific player for the Yankees. And it never dawned on me that you could have done both back then, been a player and then a broadcaster. So July of 1961, an old-timers day at Yankee Stadium is the first one I can remember.
So your dad, Yankee fan.
Mm-hmm.
How did Howie Rose fall in love with the Mets?
Okay, well, a couple of reasons. First off, like most kids, I was a narcissist, and I thought everything was about me. So that after '61, which was some year to become a baseball fan with Mantle and Maris and the home run race and the '61 Yankees, a legendary team. Now we're moving. We lived in the Bronx then, but we were moving in the summer of '62 from the Bronx to Bayside, Queens.
Okay.
Pretty close to where Shea Stadium was being built at that time. But when the Mets were formed, I thought, okay, I'm a new baseball fan, so they created a new team just for me. I thought it was all about me. And I adopted the Mets from literally day one. I remember the very first game the Mets played on April 11th, 1962 was a night game in St. Louis. I couldn't stay up for it. I had school the next day, but I remember running into my parents' room just before I went to school, before my dad left for work, and saying, how did the Mets do last night? He said they lost. I remember being disappointed, and so it began.
It's funny.
No, so you started going at the Polo Grounds?
Yeah, I went to one game at the Polo Grounds with my dad.
Now, what's it like? Like that stadium is just one. The dimensions were
Yeah.
absolutely wild.
It's a horseshoe.
What was a game like at the Polo Grounds?
Well, to an 8-year-old kid, it was just as enthralling as being at Yankee Stadium. It was, I think, the first night game I went to. I don't think I've been to Yankee Stadium at night. So that was new for me, too. But the one thing that stands out, and you'd probably get the same response from anybody who describes their first baseball game, particularly if they go back as far as I do to the days of black and white television, where you're just absolutely in awe of the depth of the green grass and all of the colors and the smells. You know, there were unique, I wouldn't call them odors, but they were olfactory pleasures, I would call them, because the combination of beer and whatever people might have been smoking, cigars or cigarettes and hot dogs, and you know that creates a special blend that's unique to a ballpark, and that to this day would remain one of the most pleasant smells I've ever experienced.
So it's funny because even though like we didn't grow up with black and white TVs, but I do have a distinct memory of Shea, because when you walked into Shea, you did not see the field whatsoever until. Yeah. So I remember walking in Shea of just this like gray, this like not the prettiest tunnels and not the prettiest concourse. And then I remember walking through the long tunnel to get to the field, and then the first time seeing the green of the field. Yeah. And no matter what you watch it on, until you go to a field in real life, like it feels insane.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I by the time you started going to Shea Stadium, it was no longer the beautiful ballpark that it was when it opened. You know, people look at Shea in retrospect and say it was a dump, it was our dump, and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? It wasn't always a dump.
Wasn't it the eighth world wonder they called it?
Well, it was state of the art anyway when it opened. Remember, it opened in conjunction with the World's Fair.
Right, yeah.
So they did a lot of business just from fairgoers to the ballpark and vice versa. But I so loved those blue and orange plates that adorn the outside of the ballpark that fell into disrepair remember, Shea Stadium was a municipally owned ballpark, and New York City went bankrupt in the 1970s, and anything associated with New York City really did not wear very well back then. So the colors on those plates faded, and when the new ownership took over in 1980, it was like the first thing they did was get rid of them. And I felt so sort of disenfranchised emotionally from what Shea Stadium meant to me, because they changed the whole look of it. Now, I know to your generation, that's how you remember Shea, and your memories are as deep and as pleasant as you want them to be. But for me, it's almost as though they played in two different ballparks back then.
Yeah, like for me, I'm sure you feel the same way, orange on the field level, blue on the loge, the green in the mezzanine,
the neon signs,
the red in the upper deck, the neon signs dressing up the outside of the stadium.
The memories I have of like driving home from like if my parents drove to like dinner in Long Island or something and driving back and being on like the Grand Central, and at night like falling asleep in the car, but like the light of the neon signs on the outside, like I was so excited to see that every time I drove by the stadium.
You know, however many times we drove. Talk about driving with my dad driving when I was a kid. If we ever drove by either Shea Stadium or Yankee Stadium when a game was going on, I felt as though someone were keeping me from my destiny. It's like, why are we in this car? We should be in that ballpark, you know? It had such a magical lure to a kid, and I hope it still does. I really hope it still does, because it's so different now. Back when I was growing up, we went to the game to watch the game, and that outside world did not exist until the last out. Now, I mean, Citi Field is no different than any of the other new ballparks. There are just so many ways to stay occupied other than watching the game. I sometimes think when I see the people in front of our booth, which is section 318, they come and go all during the game. What are you doing here? Are you here to eat, or are you here to watch the game? Watch the stinking game. That's why we're here. And I really miss that. I miss that singular feeling of, it's kind of almost a raison d'etre. You know, when you go to a Major League Baseball game, there's nothing else going on. I mean, they could be tearing the world apart outside the confines of the ballpark, but I'm here watching a game, and this is how I felt when I was a kid. It was so mesmerizing. I couldn't think of anything but how the game was going, and and just being at the ballpark. Now it seems like it's just like the game is almost incidental to some people, and I hate that. I don't care who gets ticked off of me about that. I hate that. You come to the ballpark, watch the stinking game.
And visit Howie and Keith at section, or maybe don't, 318.
Al,
You're the one that said it.
Well, I'd love to say hi to all of you, but you may have to get past Al, the security guard.
There you go.
Good
Al's
luck.
a tough
Good-
cookie.
Yeah, good luck with that.
So we've talked, you mentioned about the changes over the years in the game. So one thing we definitely want to hear from you is a little philosophical question.
Oh, I'm a regular Socrates. Yeah,
I know,
you got
I know.
the right guy. For
Trust me, we've
philosophy.
been listening to you for years, so we know.
That's what I'm afraid of.
The sport has evolved in many ways. The things going on surrounding the game have evolved in many ways, as you pointed out. If you could change or implement 2 new rules to baseball, to the game today, what would they be? We already have the pitch clock. We've got the extra inning rule, which some people like, some people don't. We've got the disengagement rule. So what are 2 rules that you would, in Howie Rose's world, amend?
I would limit the number of pitchers on a staff to 10 or 11.
that are active for that night, or just
Well, now you're getting into a whole other string of possibilities. But I long for the day when the starting pitcher, as he used to do, drives the gate. When I was growing, and I'm sorry, I hate to keep saying when I was growing up, when I was a kid, but
Koufax, Drysdale.
well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the evolution of the game, as you suggest. And it used to be that you'd pick up the newspaper. Remember those? You'd pick up the newspaper and you'd see, Seaver's pitching against Gibson tonight. I gotta go. When there were 55,000 seats at Shea Stadium, and you can bring $2 and get in, $1.30 to sit in the upper deck, as I did. Obviously, a different world now. But the point I'm making is that the starting pitcher was the focal point. You very often went to the game to see that starting pitcher with the expectation that he was going 9 innings. And you can't just snap your fingers and go back to that. It would involve years of reconditioning and rethinking how pitchers are developed from the lowest levels of a farm system. But I would, assuming they could get to that point, limit the number of pitchers on a staff so that you have to push your starting pitcher. Not to the point where you risk injury, but because your starting pitcher has been groomed to think that he's going as far as he can, not that he's looking to the bullpen after 5 or 6 innings. So you learn as a pitcher to add and subtract, which are phrases you don't hear much anymore. But that would make it a more interesting game to me if the starting pitcher were really the focal point that he used to be. And as far as other rules are concerned, I don't know. I would ban day-night doubleheaders.
That's that's funny you say. I mean, that's when you're on the inside, a day-night doubleheader stinks.
Yes.
How about putting back the traditional scheduled single admission doubleheader? Because those don't happen anymore.
No, but and maybe as the game times have decreased a bit now since the pitch clock, although it seems like they're starting to creep back up again. But and I can go back 20 years having had this discussion with former Mets front office people. When I'd ask about that, they'd say, the one thing that you probably don't realize, and I understand why you'd like to go back to doubleheaders, Mondays off, that kind of a thing. The public stopped clamoring for doubleheaders as the games became longer.
Right.
And obviously our attention spans now, thanks to social media and just the advent of the internet and cell phones and everything else in this digital age, our attention spans are so much shorter than they used to be that people don't forget about the price and getting 2 for 1 or whatever. People don't want to invest 7 hours at the ballpark anymore. I did when I was a kid, but times have changed, and I understand that. I don't think there is a huge outcry for scheduled doubleheaders.
My favorite thing in the world was a Shea Stadium doubleheader, and I'll say this on this podcast because you can't do this now. But Shea used to only be able to get on field level through one entrance on the concourse.
Yeah.
So what me and my buddies would do is we would go down in the 7th of the first game, and we would ask people leaving, "Can we please have your ticket for the
we
second
used to
game?"
do
I
stuff
believe
like
this.
that.
I believe this.
And
I can see this.
And you always
That's not outlandish. That's not outrageous.
and like you would get like one time everybody was saying how much you want to pay, and I was like, I'm 12. I don't have money to give you.
Oh, please.
So then one time this person hears me and goes, "What, are you guys looking for tickets?" And we were like, "Yeah." He goes, "My boss gave me these. You can have them." And they were AA. They were row AA, which was the two blue leather seats in the front. And like doubleheaders at Shea were just my absolute favorite. But like Howie, like we all grew up Mets fans, and like John and I like talk about this now, and we've only been here for a few years. But for you, is it the same thing where like it doesn't get old for us working for the team and like being a part of this?
Oh, goodness, no. I'm pretty introspective anyway by nature. So there aren't a lot of times when I drive to the ballpark that I don't think about how incredibly, it's not even being lucky or fortunate, it's how beyond belief it is that I could have grown up in the upper deck at Shea Stadium. My first job, part-time job, was as a wagon boy at Wallbaum's, which was a supermarket.
I know Wallbaum's.
Big supermarket chain in New York, which has since changed. But in 1970, the summer of 1970, the Mets were defending world champions. My job was walking around the parking lot behind Wallbaum's on Springfield Boulevard and Bayside, bringing back all the shopping carts that were left when people loaded up their cars. And I used to have my transistor radio going. You know, I was listening to Lindsey, Bob, and Ralph. You think I could have dreamt back then that, first of all, I would wind up not only working as a Mets broadcaster, but Murph would be a partner of mine on radio and Ralph would be a partner of mine on television? I mean, that's nuts. That's absolutely off the wall. So I'm beyond humbled by having had the career that I've had with the Mets, feeling as a Met, obviously to have been inducted into their Hall of Fame and everything just kind of brings it all to a kind of a head. It's surreal. That can't happen, right? But it did.
Yeah, and you mentioned Murph and Ralph Kiner, and nowadays you're working with Keith Rad, who's right around our age. So I'm wondering, in your estimation, how has broadcasting changed from guys like, Mike Shannon and John Sterling and an older wave, an older generation where, maybe smoking cigarettes in the booth,
well,
maybe
there was that,
to today where social media exists and it's just a much different world. So, and you've lived in both of those worlds.
Yeah.
So how would you say they've changed?
I think what has happened over the years is that there's been such a stark division of how the game is presented on television as opposed to how it's presented on radio. And I say that because there's as much information that you might want to relay to the listener or viewer as you want to take the time to find, or on television, as much as the help that you have compiling it gives to you. Obviously, you do your own homework too, but there's just so much. And as you guys talk about all the time, there are just so many different statistics that you could drown in if you get too involved in trying to explain them. Now, television gives you a much better forum to do that. For one thing, you can present it graphically and explain it casually because the viewer can see the game. But on radio, when you are that listener's eyes and ears, you've got to understand that your primary objective is to report the game going on in front of you. And nowadays, I see a lot of broadcasters who are so well prepared that they're too intent on telling you how much they've researched and how much they've learned and how much information they have that I think comes at the expense of presenting the game in an entertaining fashion. It's still the entertainment business. And I think that I could say with a fair amount of certitude that most of, I wouldn't necessarily say the calls, but most of the stuff that people remember that we've said over the years very often is anecdotal as opposed to simply the call of a particular play. Obviously, there are some memorable ones, right? A no-hitter, a pennant winner, things like that. Yeah, you're going to remember that. But the offbeat stuff, which I refer to as anecdotal, those are the things that you can only present if you're comfortable enough with your ability to stay with the game. And I'm only talking about it on radio now. Stay on the game, but be comfortable enough with your ability to weave the stories in and out around what's going on the field. That's what draws you to the listener. You know, the beauty of radio, to me, it's the most intimate medium out there. It's you, you and me. You and me. I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to tens or hundreds of thousands of people. It's kind of a one-on-one relationship that a radio listener has with a broadcaster. And if you keep that in mind and you make it reflect that intimacy, that's where the connection's made. And that's what I try to do.
I worked in radio for a long time before this at Sirius XM, which I know you might not consider radio. I know a lot of.
I sure do.
You do? Okay, good. 'Cause
Mike Francesa poo-pooed it.
A lot of terrestrial guys do not like satellite, and then don't even get them started on us as podcasters. But I worked on a daily 3-hour comedy talk show for a decade, like right out of college up until I got my job here. And the relationship that you would see my hosts or even myself have with the listener when we do events where you meet them in public.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it because, and I think as technology's evolved, as the listener has become not just in your car, but like in your ear, like literally headphones. I think that changed the relationship even more because now like you're in that person's head. And like when they're listening to you, it's right there. There's nothing else.
But then, no, that's interesting because I don't know the kids do this now because, well, they might, but there are so many ways to watch, never mind listen to a product now. I mean, you could go to sleep when your parents tell you to, but have your cell phone and watch the game on the phone, right? But for us, it was sneaking the transistor radio into bed with a little earpiece that you put in your ear. And you're right. I think that does reflect a little bit of that one-on-one relationship that develops between the broadcaster and the listener.
Now, Howie, you mentioned great calls and what makes a great call, an anecdotal versus informational. And I know a lot of people have debated some of your best calls. I know when we made the video for your Hall of Fame induction, we picked out what we thought were some of the biggest ones. You're giving a look. Maybe
I'm giving a look because I have a feeling we're going someplace obscure, which I like.
No,
we can talk about calls that I say reflected big moments, and yeah, I mean, we all kind of know those. Not that they know them because they came from me, but just because of the moment.
Sure, like
I was hoping you were going to pull some stuff out from under the rug that was, as I say, obscure, or funny, or mistakes, or whatever.
We want you to talk about maybe some off the radar moments that you've had that you think are those obscure, funny moments that might not be the mainstream Mike Piazza hitting the home run against Steve Karsay necessarily, or Carl Everett's game-tying home run grand slam, I think, against the Expos back in '97.
I remember that.
Yeah. Rub it brand new shiny one up, I think was the call.
Yeah, well, that was an old Red Barber line.
Okay.
That just came to me. I'll confess this, because I'm getting away from your question, and I think somebody else could probably answer that question better than I can, because it seems like every night we have moments similar to how you describe it, and a lot of them are fueled by mistakes, honest mistakes. And one thing I learned really early in my career is that self-deprecation is a very valuable tool. And if you make a mistake and you don't get overcome by it, but quite to the contrary, you embrace it and have fun with it, that's what the listener really latches onto. So, I mean, I've done thousands of those, literally. However many games I've done, I've probably made a mistake or two in every game that I've been able to tap dance around or have fun with. So I would think that's a better question for somebody else to answer. But as far as just getting into, you talk about the brand new shiny one, I'll never be comfortable with some of the stuff I did when I was doing television with the Mets, because I came from a radio background and was kind of thrust into doing television, and I thought, well, a baseball announcer's really got to have pet phrases and catchphrases, and I just tried too hard and came up with things that I thought were too contrived. So I got rid of almost all of them.
Like, that's a goner. I remember. That was your home run call.
Yeah, and I just didn't think that played as well on radio. Because on radio, I'll give you a perfect probably wreck your ears just now. I'll give you a perfect example of that. As we tape this segment, it's during the Washington series. And in the first game of the Washington series, Brandon Nimmo hit an opposite field home run, which just kept carrying, and nobody in the ballpark off the bat thought it was going out.
Nope.
But it did. On television, I could have laid back a little bit, followed the ball, and when it went out, said, that's a goner. Because on television, you punctuate what somebody's looking at. But what I learned real quickly on radio was that I'm too busy describing what's going on. I kind of liked the way the radio call of that home run sounded because it never appeared until the ball went over the wall that it was going to be a home run. And I think on television, you lose some of that surprise element just because we're all watching the same thing, So I'm not sure what question that answers, if it does at all.
No, it's interesting.
But it's just the spontaneity on radio of not relying on a forced sort of signature call. Because if I did that last night, for example, I think it would have taken away from how I represented that home run, because I think I presented the surprise element well, whereas I might not have if I had been worried about saying that's a goner.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
it's going to be a memorable home run just because in the ballpark, did not have any idea that was going to go out.
Yeah. James Wood didn't think so either, the way that he
and
started.
we take our cue
from
the outfielder,
100%.
the way he pursues it, too.
You bring up catchphrases. You have a pretty famous one. Put it in the book.
Yeah.
Can you give us a rundown of how that came to be?
Yeah, it was really somewhat organic because when I was younger, so much younger than today, we'd be playing ball in the schoolyard or even sitting in the upper deck at Shea. If a team I was on, doesn't matter, playing basketball or stickball or even roller hockey or even watching a Met game in the upper deck at Shea, if the Mets won or if my team won, myself or one of my friends might have said, all right, that's in the books, or that one's in the books, or just some variation of that. The inspiration for it was Marty Brennaman, the Hall of Fame voice of the Cincinnati Reds for many, many years, who would punctuate a Reds win by saying upon the last out or the game-winning hit, and this one belongs to the Reds. And I thought that was so perfect because it was succinct, it wasn't self-aggrandizing, it let a listener know immediately that the Reds won the game without chest pounding or anything like that. So I decided that I wanted to try to find something like that, and eventually I kind of came up with put it in the books, but I didn't like the inflection that I used early on. It wasn't working for me. It was very sing-songish.
Well, was it?
It was kind of like, put it in the books or something like that. And a few variations of that just never really resonated with me until a game ended on kind of a bang-bang play. I don't think it was a game-winning hit by a Met. I think it was a close play at first base, and the call was out, and I just, punched it up the way I do now, put it in the books like that. And I think I went, whoa, to myself. I said, I kind of like that. So let's try that again next time the Mets win a game, even if it's in less dramatic fashion. And I felt that was the right inflection, so I stayed with that. And for whatever reason, it seemed to take off.
My favorite put it in the books that you've ever done was, I don't know if I told you this, Howie, when I got married, was nice enough to do a custom, right before I stepped on the glass.
You got it in one shot, I hope.
Yes,
Good.
I did. It was a solid
My
step.
nephew did not.
Really, he missed?
More than once.
More than once?
And I remember saying to him...
You only get one strike in that game.
Well, there were a couple, and I just looked at him as he was making his way up the aisle, and I said, you had one job to do.
That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I missed.
Did you?
Well, I was wearing Gucci. I was wearing like slippers, and somebody right before the wedding said to me, I had a friend who went right through the glass, and then I was terrified.
Well, they're supposed to wrap it properly, and then that's not going to happen.
I know, but I was wearing slippers. I was wearing slippers, so I was afraid to do it.
Why did you marry it in slippers? Would you marry it on the beach?
Gucci slippers.
Oh, excuse me.
Second time you said the word Gucci there. I'm waiting for the third one.
Well, I kind of panicked and tried to not say it, and then I was like, I just had to go through with it. John signed my ketubah.
Did he really?
I did, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you guys are really close.
Yeah. It's a whole...
Full disclosure, by the way, my younger daughter, Chelsea, went to Indiana with Jonathan's wife, Shauna?
Yeah.
Shauna.
Roommates freshman year.
Yep.
I think it was Frisco is where they lived together. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Was it
I forget the dorm complex.
I'll tell you what it was.
Okay.
Because
you paid for it.
No, how about this? How about this? I even wrote this in the acknowledgments or whatever it was to the in the book that I wrote 100 years ago. My older daughter Alyssa went to Quinnipiac. Her first roommate's name, you ready for this?
Yeah.
Her first roommate's name was Lindsay Nelson.
Really?
Wow.
Yep. Now, Lindsay was a girl, of course. And ironically, she was the daughter of the former football giant, Carl Nelson.
Wow.
Which, Carl was there when we were moving them in. I said, oh, Lindsay, I get it now. But imagine that. So here's my daughter, whose first college roommate is Lindsay Nelson, and then Chelsea goes to Indiana, and her first dorm, freshman year, it was Shea. Can you
Shea
Foster
McNutt.
Shea?
Yeah, Foster Shea. Yeah, Foster Shea.
I forget about there was a Foster who played for the Mets, George Foster.
Yes.
Forget that. But Shea?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
you don't come up with material like this.
So when I
very
first met
often.
Shauna, she quickly found out I was a big Met fan. And she goes, oh, well, my roommate actually, her dad works for the Mets. And I'm like, oh, who is he? And I'm thinking like, it's a front office guy. Like,
Yeah.
And she goes, his name is Howie Rose. Are you familiar? And I was like, no, never heard of him. I was like, can I come over to your room later? So, yeah, that was quite ironic. And then I got to know Howie all these years later.
Yeah.
So
It's crazy.
Small world.
It's a very well, like me and John. I found out I lived in Jersey for 2 years, where if I ended up staying in that town, it would have been 5 minutes from
Yeah.
where John grew up.
Yeah, Marlboro, Sayreville.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we know a lot of people people in the Marlboro, Manalapan area. So we're playing that game of geography.
Oh, yeah. We don't have to say the
that
name
we
of it.
play so well.
Luckily,
yeah.
this is a very centralized podcast.
Yeah.
But wait, John, before we get out of here, you were
Yeah.
just quickly talking about your glass. Put it
By
in
the way,
books.
this is much more entertaining and fun for me than preparing for another game. So keep going.
Well, you got the Rockies coming in next,
Oh,
so
God.
you got to get ready for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, so Howie made a little tape. I asked him to do a recording. It was John and Sean, it's official, so now you can put in the books. And I remember I had my brother-in-law on speaker duty, and like I'm under the chuppah, and I keep looking over to him, and I'm like, you're ready, right? I was like, you got the recording, you're ready, right? Like, you're good to go. I texted it to him, and if you watch my video, I keep looking over. You see me just looking over nonstop, being like, you're ready, right? Hold on, okay, it's coming.
So what happened? As soon as you put your foot down?
Yep. I slammed it. No, I waited. No, the recording played, and then bang. And then we went to Simon Tova Mazel Tov right after. It was an electric sequence.
Nice.
So I can't thank
Happy
you
to
enough. Oh, it was amazing. I mean, that and Matteau, it's this or that, which was the bigger one.
They all work.
Howie, we cannot thank you enough for
My
taking the
pleasure.
time.
It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, like Vito said, we grew up listening to you. We still listen to you. But we don't love when you bash us or
Only
on the
him.
radio.
But it's all in fun.
I know, I'm
That's-
kidding.
Come on.
Yo, this guy,
You can't. You see that? That's where it's very thin-skinned.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh, he loves being made fun of. He gets this. That's like his thing.
Good, because
Yeah.
that just gives me more ammunition.
If I'm not there when Howie records his pregame segment, he says, "Oh, there he goes again, walking around trying to get
Oh, he's
noticed."
big timing us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should see how happy he is. He gets such a little good boy smile when he gets made fun of by you on the broadcast.
Oh, is that right? So he likes it.
He loves it.
I mean, that was a fun one.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. I rewound it thanks to the MLB TV app and the radio section of that, and the whole family sat around and it was funny. So
Excellent.
yeah. So I guess you could do it again, maybe if you want to.
Oh, you'll be looking for ways to sucker me into doing it now. So I've got to play a little rope-a-dope. And
Howie, we have a tradition on the show when we have legendary radio people on.
we step on the glass.
We ask them
Different.
to hold our meet at the Apple koozie and give us a plug to that camera.
So we've
Okay.
had Mike and we've had Evan Roberts do it. So you're hitting third in the lineup.
All right. This is a koozie. This is a bottle of water. Said bottle of water slips very comfortably, or at least it's supposed to,
There you go.
right inside the koozie. For what reason, I don't know. But the important thing is, these guys over here, John and Vito, they're the brains of this outfit, and you can meet them at the Apple.
Do you like the name Meet at the Apple?
I never really gave it much thought. Yeah, it's cool.
Right.
I mean, it's trying to think. Is there any variation to that? Nah, Meet at the Apple. Everybody knows what it is.
It's
Meet at the
experiential. You
home
come
run
to City
Apple.
Field, you meet at the it's
Meet-
it's the outside.
You know what I
Apple.
like about it? And I don't even know if you guys consciously did this, but Meet comes from Meet the Mets, which has only been an anthem for this team going back virtually to the beginning. And the Apple is the home run apple. So you've got Meet, which was from the beginning, and the Apple, which is a little bit more, recent.
Last question.
For us, it's when you get off the subway and you're meeting people, you always say,
You'll meet
I'll
you
just
at the
meet you
Apple?
Apple. Yeah.
I have one last question. What is your favorite version of Meet the Mets? You had the original, then you had the hot dogs, green grass, all shade. Then in 2000, they did a rap version of it.
Well, that's please don't even. Let's not
I
even
didn't
go
think
there.
that was your favorite.
Let's not even go there. Frankly, hearing Jane Jarvis, when was it? I guess it was when I threw the first pitch out last year. Oh, that went well. But I do have a bad shoulder. There's a reason for that. But anyhow, one of you guys, somebody asked me, what would you like them to play when we introduce you as you go to the mound? And I said, well, nothing will give me a bigger kick than hearing Jane Jarvis playing her own composition called Let's Go Mets, which you could probably do a little post-production here and find that. But that's what she used to play as the Mets took the field. And I've just got such warm memories of those days that to walk out to the mound to that was, you talk about surreal, that was just another example. So, yeah, that's my favorite. Anything by Jane Jarvis, but her version of Meet the Mets just takes me back to being in the ballpark. Well, and, of course, the original music, the instrumental, not the words.
Well, Howie, thank you so much. You can listen to this podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on the Mets YouTube. Meet at the Apple. I'm on Twitter at Vito F. Khaleesi, John at JMB9191. Howie, thank you so much again for sitting down with us, and hope to do this with you again soon before the end of the season.